So welcome to our first session. We're starting the day with EV charging because these vehicles can't go if they're not charged. We got a great panel today. I'll introduce them shortly. But first, wanted to give just sort of a quick overview of where we're at for building out our charging infrastructure for the state. So you may have seen some great little buttons in the hallway that NYPA brought. The future is electric. This is true for many elements of our state assets. It's very true of our vehicles. For state agencies, this is really important for two main reasons. There's the EO22 mandate, which everyone's familiar with, to fully electrify our vehicles, our light-duty fleet, non-emergency by 2035. Which just so happens to be the same time that ICE, or internal combustion engine, new car sales will be phased out in the state of New York and many other states across the country. So 2035, a very important deadline for a number of reasons, and easy just to think of this as shorthand as this is happening very soon, sooner than we think. So even though 2035, a decade plus out, really, we need to start acting now to hit those targets. So the state is currently starting from around 6% zero-emission vehicles based on those parameters in the EO22 mandate. All of the 75 affected entities put together ZEV conversion plans in the last year, which in aggregate shows all of the major milestones of how we get from here to there. With a lot of early wins that we can take advantage of in these early years as our charging infrastructure continues to get built out. So want to make sure that agencies are taking advantage of the flexibility as part of the plug-in hybrid exemption. This allows you to get used to charging your vehicles without being fully dependent on it. It takes away any of those range considerations. You can go 500-600 miles without a recharge or refuel. So that will give you the operational flexibility to start building these vehicles into your fleets. Secondly, we want to make sure that you have plans for charging your vehicles at your facilities. And so this can look like three different things for most of our affected entities. If you're in a state-owned facility, you should contact our team, OGS Resiliency and Sustainability. We'll find a proper contractual pathway to move that through design and implementation, either through OGS design and construction or through our partners at NYPA. Secondly, if you're in an OGS or other agency-owned facility, you should also contact us, mostly for awareness on the first bullet, where we can make sure we are factoring your fleet targets into those designs. We have your numbers, we have your targets. We don't necessarily know what those look like facility by facility. So as that information comes available to you and your planning starts moving through procurement and you're taking those vehicles in, we want to make sure we're factoring that into our EVSE designs. Thirdly, if you're in a private facility with the commercial lease, you should contact OGS Leasing, and they will make sure we are building those EV terms into your lease for negotiations. Very important that we take advantage of those windows as they become available. So before we turn over to our panelists and learn about the wider ecosystem of EV charging across the state, wanted to just start with where we're at for our own state facilities. Ideally, these vehicles are rolling out of our garages and lots with a full charge. So currently, we have a number of chargers across the state, roughly around 100, 120 across a few agencies. This is expanding very quickly. We have over 600 ports currently in design. We're laying conduit for an additional 500 beyond that for rapid expansion. Trying to touch all of our OGS facilities. We're working with many other agencies that have some of the largest fleets, DOT, DEC, OMH, parks. So a lot of that operational complexity, we're trying to get those early wins out the door. A lot of the ports you're seeing on that map will be available this year. So there's a lot happening in the pipeline, but we want to make sure that we're building out more. We want to make sure you're also aware of and taking advantage of public commercial EV charging. A lot of your liquid or gasoline refueling happens at commercial stations through WEX or other kinds of cards. If you're in the WEX program, they have a EV charging pilot that you can take advantage of. Allows you to use 5 EV charging networks, including some of our panelists here, and will allow you a little bit more of a seamless transition as those will continue to expand. So as I said, over 600 ports currently in design for executive agencies under EO22. We have funding available for executive agencies. If you don't fall in that category or you're unsure, please come to us and we can figure out how we can move forward. There's lots of grant money available, federal, there's state programs. We're happy to help direct you to NYSERDA, NYPA, or other partners who can make sure you're making the most of these programs. But we know we need more. So I'm just going to quickly walk through some of the different kinds of charging that you'll be seeing at our facilities in the coming months. First off is the most common level 2 EV charging. This was mostly positioned for overnight charges, roughly 6 to 8 hours. You'll see these chargers here at the plaza, at the Harriman campus. This is sort of our standard kind of default installation. It works great for most cases where, again, a vehicle is sitting overnight or for a number of hours and will be really the bulk of our installations moving forward. But we know this is not going to meet the operational needs of all of our agencies. So in addition to that, we are beginning to pilot some solar battery-powered EV charging. We know the city of New York and other municipalities across the country currently use this, have this in their toolkit. Particularly useful if you're in a location that is constrained for electricity. These can work off the grid. They're battery powered so that if it's not sunny or if it's nighttime, you'll still be able to draw a charge from them. We are rolling out our first DC fast chargers, both in Albany, New York City, and some other locations very soon. So these are going to give you that closest kind of experience similar to what you have at a gas station today, where 20 to 30 minutes for most of your vehicles will get you over an 80% state of charge and keep you moving. But this will also be supplemented by off-facility charging, as I mentioned. So in our urban areas, there are EV charging hubs that are starting to launch and grow, where you have a large collection of fast chargers, and you don't have that sort of capacity constraints that you might see if there's only 2 ports in a given location. And then there's how we integrate EV charging throughout our public realm. And again, 2 of our panelists here are great examples of that, how we're thinking about curbside charging, how we're using our lampposts, other kinds of civic infrastructure, and repositioning that for the future of electric vehicles. There are some other very exciting technologies that NYPA is beginning to explore, and NYSERDA and others in induction charging, where there's no wires. You're really just sort of working off of a wireless power charge, and that can look either like with pads, it can be built into the actual roads. So there's a lot of exciting ways that charging will be integrated into the world around you. And so we wanted to take the time today to learn a little bit more about how these pieces are coming together outside of our own facilities. And again, just a reminder, here are the kind of 3 main cases. Contact us if you're unsure. We want to make sure we're moving forward for all of our facilities and getting those port counts up even higher. So now I will turn it over to John Markowitz, head of e-mobility at NYPA, great EV advocate, always across the state. And he will give us an update on the Evolve program that is bringing fast charging all across New York.
Thanks, Bill. And can I get the remote?
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. So I'll talk a bit about public charging and public fast charging in particular with our Evolve New York program. First, I'll give you a quick summary of NYPA's role in e-mobility. We've been involved in the EV sector for over 20 years. Program in the early days lived in our R&D group, but as it became more mainstream, we formed a separate group of e-mobility, and we do engineering, procurement, and construction services for our state and local government customers, building out all kinds of charging. So everything from fleet chargers, the overnight level 2 style that Bill talked about, all the way up to DC fast charging and charging for things like transit buses. We're also doing feasibility studies for state and local governments that just need a long-term capital plan. Like if your goal is to be 100% electric in 2035, 2040, just to map all that out. You know, which vehicles do you retire in what year? What kind of chargers do you put in what facilities? What's the lowest hanging fruit? What are other ancillary issues you need to look at in addition to installing charging? Like, do you have to retrain mechanics? All these other issues. And just documenting all that so you have a long-term roadmap. Typical customer project would be something like this. This is the NFTA, the transit agency in Buffalo. We're electrifying their bus depot. They have 100 buses in this particular depot. And we future-proofed the whole facility to build out the electrical room for the full 100 bus build. And also build them a customer-owned substation right at that bus depot, which lowers their electric rates by having their own customer-owned transformer. So really just thinking out, going forward out to 2030, 2035 in the initial build will help save money in later phases. Plus these have the overhead pantograph style charging that you see in that middle photo on the lower side. So there's actually a motorized arm coming from the ceiling of the bus depot, mating with the roof of the bus, so you don't have a technician that has to unplug 100 buses every morning. So there's some substantial labor savings in these kind of layouts. So, you know, I guess the big point on this is that there's no one solution, right? Like all vehicles are used differently. There's all sorts of charging solutions that need to be looked at, and you need to really look at how are the vehicles used to pick the appropriate one. And now to switch gears over to public charging. Back in 2018, we were in discussions with our senior leadership and our board at NYPA about the electrification of light-duty vehicles, not just fleets, but also the general public. And we had the climate legislation that was just being enacted at the time. And knowing that transportation is the largest single portion of the state's greenhouse gas signatures, we said, well, we really need to have the right kind of public infrastructure so people would feel confident buying fully electric vehicles and traveling anywhere in the state. Back then in 2018, we were thinking, well, the map needs to look something like this map that's on the screen for people to feel confident, right? But the way the map actually looked back then is you had the Tesla network, which was completely proprietary to their vehicles. And then you had the network serving everything else. So if you basically had a Ford or a Chevy or some other brand of EV back in that day, there were no fast chargers from Albany going west out to Buffalo or Albany going north up to Quebec. So how could somebody really feel like confident in buying an EV in that state of play? So we basically went to our board and asked for funding to fill in these, what we were calling DC fast charging deserts, right? To make it completely possible to travel between those destinations and to be that first backbone, to be the first mover to take on that early adoption risk on building out these fast chargers to get the private sector going so that like finally people would feel comfortable enough to buy the vehicles and others would feel confident building out these fast chargers. So we opened up our first site in 2020. Here's the governor visiting that site. It was in LaGrangeville, New York. For a long time, it was the only fast charger on the Taconic Parkway. So between like the New York City area and the capital region. So LaGrangeville, for those who don't know, that's just outside of Poughkeepsie. And then the other thing that was happening at the time is the state-of-the-art in DC fast charging outside of Tesla at the time was a single 50 kilowatt machine. So you're spending the better part of an hour charging a vehicle and something like that, and people were calling that fast charging. And we knew all the vehicles coming out around 2025 or so were going to be able to charge at 3 to 5 times that speed. So that's the kind of charging we figured needed to go in. 150 kilowatts, 350 kilowatts, those kind of speeds. And that would basically allow somebody on a road trip to stop for maybe 20 minutes and be completely topped off from empty to maybe 80%. and that made those kind of long road trips practical. The other thing we really looked at for all our sites is having multiple DC fast chargers. So somebody could stop, and if there's somebody else using one, well, there's 3 more. So chances of having an empty one, much more likely, right, when you have 4 than when you just have 1. So for those who haven't been to one of these sites, I can give you a quick idea of the layout. So it basically starts with a utility-owned transformer and a concrete pad that we set up for that. Then if you go over from that, the next stage would be the electrical switchgear, so those tall gray cabinets. So basically the same thing like a circuit breaker panel in your house, just much bigger. Then from that, you go to these power cabinets, so that's that next set of tall gray boxes. That's actually what's charging the vehicle. So those are the boxes that are going to convert AC power over to DC power. And a charging station like the one you're seeing here, this is an 8-charger site in Hancock, New York, along the southern tier. And for a long time, we were the only fast charging outside of Tesla along that whole southern tier route. So a site like this is basically like the size of like a small office building, right, in terms of the amount of power. So, major infrastructure upgrade. So coming off those power cabinets, the AC power then becomes high power DC, and it serves this row of dispensers. So we have 8 dispensers at this particular location, and that's the thing that the driver is going to really interface with. They're going to call it the charger, but actually the charging's happening upstream of that. And as you can see from the right-hand corner of this picture, Tesla co-located with us. So we both were able to save some trenching and transformer expense by co-locating. So there's actually 20 chargers at this particular location between us and Tesla. Then in terms of a DC fast charger and the anatomy of the dispenser, you have a set of liquid-cooled cables. So this was the first time in history that you would have basically an electrical cable with a jacket going around it with a liquid coolant flowing through it. And this is basically what allows you to get to power levels of 350 kilowatts. So like, the amount of power of a small office building and a single unit feeding a car. And this is what really allows for this kind of 15, 20-minute charging experience. So you have these liquid-cooled cables. Then you also have a touch screen that the driver can interface with to do their payment information, to see what level of charge they're at without having to get back in the car. There's a credit card reader. So there's multiple payment interfaces to make the user experience as easy as possible. So they could either pay by credit card, it's tap, swipe, chip, all the options. There's also a QR code that you could snap on with your phone to download the proper phone app if you'd rather pay that way. There's also tap to pay interface to pay with like Apple Wallet or Google Wallet. There's also visibility lighting at these chargers, because you could imagine if some of them are at, say, a busy strip mall or something like that, they're over 6 feet tall with like this green halo, so you could sort of find them as you're traveling across the parking lot. And on this slide, you can also see what the phone app looks like. So you could do like a swipe to pay with this. And through the phone app, you could see what the status of the chargers are before you even leave your home. You could see, all right, like 2 out of the 3 chargers are being used right now, or you could check that kind of thing from the road if you're not the driver. In terms of program status, we celebrated our 100th charger milestone about 1.5 years ago. And we're continuing the build out of the network through 2025. Currently, we're at 170 chargers at 43 sites. Our long-term goal is to get to 400 chargers by end of 2025. And the sites vary anywhere from 2 chargers all the way up to 12 chargers at a single site. You could see the cow, that's the mascot for Stewart's. And for those in the capital region, I'm sure you're all familiar with Stewart's. We've done over a half a dozen of their locations, so those are sort of perfect. They're right off the interstates with bathrooms and food, and they're nice busy locations that are well lit. So we've done a whole bunch of their sites. We've also done municipal parking lots, airports. The lower right-hand corner is JFK Airport, which at the time we built it was the biggest non-Tesla DC fast charging site on the whole East Coast. And that's a 10-charger site, very heavily used by taxis and rideshare vehicles dropping people off at the airport. So very active charging site. We're building a similar one at LaGuardia Airport currently. And then recently we've acquired federal funding with our partners at State DOT to build out the network even more. And the name of that program is NEVI, National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program. It's part of the Infrastructure and Jobs Act. And we're coordinating with State DOT to make sure that we're at what the feds call fully built out status. And what that means is that every one of your major interstates has a fast charging hub with a minimum of 4 150 kilowatt chargers, and that one of those hubs is located every 50 miles or less along all those major roadways. So we're working very closely with them about exactly where we site those chargers so that we meet those program goals. We opened up one of the first NEVI-funded charging sites in the country, and that was not too far from here in Kingston, New York. Our second site is in Richmondville, also not too far from the Capital Region going west, and then also going north from the Capital Region. The third one was North Hudson going up into the Adirondacks. So trying to fill in all those gaps so you could travel in all those directions and have fast charging. The other photo on this particular slide is right here in downtown Albany, and that's the Quackenbush Garage, just about half a mile from here. And so we're really looking at doing all the use cases, the corridors. Also, urban fast charging is a really crucial need for apartment dwellers and for taxi fleets. So we're trying to address that need as well as fleet users. And just another photo collage of all our different sites, and you could just see all the different layouts. That lower left-hand corner is one of the downtown revitalization sites, so a smaller site with 2 chargers, all the way up to a 10 or 12 charger airport site and our typical 4 charger hubs. So with that, I thank you. I look forward to all the Q&A at the end, and I'll hand it over to the next speaker. Thanks.
Thanks, John. Next up, we have James Tornabene, a territory sales manager for Flow, who's been running a very successful curbside program in New York City. They're also on OGS centralized contracts.
Thank you, Bill. Good morning, everybody. So before I get into our curbside deployment in New York City, I want to talk about a philosophy around public charging that has become very apparent as Flow has worked on these large-scale projects. There are 4 very important pillars to these projects. The first being the municipality or government entity that you're going to be working with. The second entity is going to be the utility that you're going to be working with. The third is going to be the EVSE provider, so the equipment provider, and there's going to be some subcategories under that, but that's really the main point. But the fourth, to me, is the most important. It's the community itself. If you're going to take anything away from today of my conversation, this is the most important, because when you do a project of a large scale and you bring it to your constituents or an airport, people that are going to be using tax dollars to fund these programs, you do not want to work on a project without community involvement, because they're going to feel like you're just putting it on them. So as we talk about the New York City project, it'll become pretty apparent. So just to give some highlights of the project, there's over 100 chargers with 120 total. 20 of them are shared between the DCAS fleet and the public, and then there's 100 chargers that have been deployed in the 5 boroughs that are on the curbs. This was a collaboration between Flow, NYC DOT, and Con Edison, and about 18 months of actually getting community buy-in around parking spaces. Being a Brooklyn resident, most people did not want to give up their spaces, but because of how successful this program has been, the next wave is going to see a much larger deployment of around 1,000, and there are now communities that are reaching out and wanting these stations to be installed. So really, what is the solve? The solve is you have 8.5 million people. There's a lot of renters. There's not a lot of parking garage space. And if there is parking garage space, it's very expensive. So the majority of folks that are living in multi-unit dwellings are going to be parking on the street. With all of the aggressive expectations around EV adoption and the zero net, we needed to come up with a solution for people to be able to charge their cars overnight. Workers that go to work be able to charge for the 5 to 6 hour dwell time when they're away from their homes, and really all of the above. New York City is obviously a bustling metropolitan, and there's a lot of movement, so there needed to be a safe place to charge your vehicle. So there's a couple of key points to this outcome. Utilization for these chargers goes anywhere from 40% all the way up to 98%, and that's on a per site basis. Really good utilization historically has been around 15 to 20%, so these chargers are being used constantly. We've been averaging about 8,000 to 9,000 unique sessions a month, with about 8 to 10 complaints a month. And the uptime of these chargers, which is the absolute most important piece, has been 99.9%. So that is very strong. And the reason that is the most important piece is because when chargers are down, the municipalities are being called, the EVSE providers being called. There's a lot of chaos that can happen because when people can't charge their cars, problems arise. So that has been a heavy focus of Flow. How do we do that? Really, we're just a vertically integrated company. This is where I think that we have found success. We are going to manufacture the hardware. We have our software that we have created, our software platform. We maintain our network, and we also, in New York City's case, have maintenance men that live in the city. We have spare parts that are stored in the city. We had a couple of cord cuts. People think that there's copper in there. Kind of scary to cut a live electrical feed, but people have done it. The cords were replaced that day. And that's the attention to detail that we've put towards this project. And another lasting thing that I would take away, or want you to take away from this, is, the collaboration piece is massive here. We actually had New York City involvement when it came to the design of the pedestals themselves. At Flow's manufacturing plants, we were manufacturing the meter and the breaker panel prefab, so when it was shipped to the city and the installation occurred, everything was already all in one. So collaboration is very important for these projects, but if the community is not bought in, there's only going to be problems that come up, even if you're perfect. So that is a huge piece to take away from this. This really just cuts a couple of points that I've already touched on, but we have a NOx, so we have a team in Canada that is constantly monitoring the network. But again, the most important part of this project is ensuring uptime and ensuring that there is a positive spin around this type of deployment, because EVs are still relatively new to the marketplace, and these projects need to take off and have success early on, or they're just going to not continue. Thank you all for listening.
Very good, thank you. And switch over to PDF. In our final presentation, and then we'll go into some questions, is from Voltpost. Olivia Cossio, who works on their business development team, leads their grant management. Can share some exciting examples of, again, how we're really thinking about building this into all of our civic infrastructure. Very common kind of like technology in London and other places. So Olivia, please take away.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for being here today. I'm excited to talk to you all about how Voltpost is decarbonizing mobility by making EV charging as common as the lamppost. So as Bill mentioned, Executive Order 22 mandated that light and medium and heavy duty vehicles need to comprise 100% of the fleets by 2035 and 2040 respectively. And in this transition to electric vehicles, and because these targets are approaching so quickly, we really are thinking about how to cost effectively and quickly scale this infrastructure so that we can make EV adoption meet the kind of goals that the state is setting. We like to show this image on the left of a Tesla in Brooklyn, New York, charging their EV out of their window. It's a pretty common sight, as you can imagine. It's New York City, and people need to charge. And today, about 1 to 2% of the cars on the road are electric, but by 2025, we need New York State would like all new vehicle sales to be electric. And so at this point, because 50% of city drivers lack, private garages to charge their EVs at home, we really want to build a public charging network that can support all kinds of drivers. So at Voltpost, we are retrofitting lampposts into an electric vehicle charging platform powered by a mobile app. This is a modular and upgradable solution that encapsulates existing lampposts and requires no construction or trenching, which minimizes community disruption and significantly reduces the upfront costs and the amount of time required for EV installation. There are 2 charging ports in the curbside configuration and up to 4 charging ports in the parking lot configuration, so we can charge up to 4 cars at a time, providing level 2 charging access. So our hardware is built with weatherproof materials. We integrate a utility certified meter, and we also have a retractable cable management system. So up to 20 feet of cable lies within the actual hardware, and at the push of a button can be dispensed. We also have an illuminating charge plug that indicates that a charge is in session. And our modularity really allows for rapid installation. We can install a charger in under 2 hours, and also maximize uptime by quickly replacing a faulty module. Our software, our mobile app allows customers to see chargers on a map, see the status of their charge, and pay through the app as well. And then our back-end dashboard surfaces insights for customers such as charger utilization, uptime, and other insights for forecasting. So this image, this exploded image, kind of emphasizes our modularity. So as you can see, 4 modules that encapsulate the existing lamppost. In our current product, we provide, the level 2 charging, as I mentioned, hardware, the software, all of the data that can be surfaced through our mobile application, as well as the operation and maintenance of our chargers, are all factored into our current version. And then on our product roadmap, because we really see ourselves as a platform for community benefits beyond EV charging, we can integrate connectivity such as Wi-Fi and 5G, and are working with project partners to integrate these kinds of technologies into our platform. Sensors such as air quality sensors or cameras to ensure that the spaces are not being blocked by ICE vehicles. Grid services, as well as media, so screens that can be integrated for advertising purposes. In 2023, we piloted with the New York City Department of Transportation with Con Edison. The New York City Department of Transportation has a goal to have 10,000 curbside chargers by 2030. we really feel that our solution, by minimizing, community disruption and the construction and trenching that often comes along with standalone charger installation, can really help the DOT meet their goals. So through this pilot, we charged their fleet vehicles over 50 times and conducted over 200 product demonstrations for customers, government officials. We were able to install a Voltpost in under 2 hours with the New York City DOT team, and we also had the highest uptime out of any of the other charging companies that participated in the pilot project. So coming up this year in New York, we piloted with the DOT, and now we'll be deploying curbside in New York this year. We also piloted our technology at the Detroit Smart Parking Lab in Detroit, and we'll be deploying 10 chargers in the state of Michigan this year. And then in Chicagoland, we are deploying a charger in Oak Park, Illinois, and throughout Cook County, Illinois, in the public right-of-way this year. We really do have a robust pipeline of partners and across the distribution channels in New York and really across the country. We feel that we've built, a team that's really capable of bringing this to fruition. Two of our co-founders are former Samsung, and other members of the team are former Barclays, Apple, Waymo, and Obama White House. Some of our investors include RWE, which is the largest German utility, and Exelon, which is the largest utility in the US, as well as other mission-aligned investors. And our advisors also come from a multitude of, finance, technology, just a broad background. So, like I mentioned, we really see Voltpost as a means to providing benefits beyond, EV charging, enabling fleet electrification, but also just electric mobility in the public realm, providing, connectivity and additional smart city services as, technology becomes commercially ready, and also just really eliminating some of the challenges that come with curbside charging deployments, the construction and trenching being the main bottleneck to rapidly scaling level 2 EV charging. And, of course, our mission is to decarbonize mobility by democratizing electric vehicle charging access, and really applaud the state of New York for, creating these aggressive yet important EV charging goals in the near future. Thank you, and happy to answer any questions.
Thanks so much. Turn back to the main deck, and we will go to some questions. So first off, wanted to start with you, John. We're now 5 or so years into Evolve, have the NEVI expansion. What have you learned from the early kind of rollout, and what does the future look like for the program?
I'd say the two biggest learnings are how important education is to the end users. So, like if any of you visited our table outside, we have the ChargeWay beacon out there, which allows people to plan out road trips, right? And we learned it was a really valuable tool for teaching the general public at car shows that DC fast charging is a thing. Here's where they're all located, and you'd see people's eyes open because it's still relatively new to people. But then we accidentally discovered this is a really useful fleet tool as well. So in the journey of electrifying our fleet, we realized, well, people are going to be signing out an EV, and they might be traveling from down in White Plains up to our power plant in Niagara Falls, and they've never been in an EV before and know nothing about the technology. So how do we prepare them for this? So we put a kiosk like that where they pick up the keys for the vehicle so they could plan their road trip with one of the fleet employees, right? Then, we put a pamphlet in the car, right? So if they're on the road, okay, there's some information about the differences between level 2 charging and DC fast charging, and how to find these things and which phone apps to use and all that. So the educational thing can't be underestimated. We have a long way to go to 2035, but a lot of education to a lot of users before we get there. So that's a big learning. The other big one is just uptime on the chargers, right? A broken charger is worse than no charger at all, right, in terms of EV adoption. And you have to plan to have good uptime, right? So you have to have local technicians, local spare parts, and the right contract structures in place to make sure your chargers are serviced quickly, because they do go down, but the trick is make sure they're back up in like 24 hours, right? And then people, will appreciate that, right? Like you'll have good uptime. So those are the two big learnings.
That's great. And a great preview of our next panel, where we'll start talking about vehicle matching and how we're leveraging technology to make sure, even before we're sending our drivers on their way, that we're making the right choices in what we're converting first early on. So now I'll turn over to our other two panelists. Would love to hear, it's great listening to the experiences in New York City so far and how we've been able to take advantage of highly contested public space, and nothing anyone hates more than a parking space going away in New York City. So what have you guys learned from those early experiences, and where do you think, even thinking beyond kind of like the city to all of New York State, what does a fully integrated public realm look like for EV charging?
Yeah, I can start. So yeah, the way that I'll touch on a couple of pretty broad points that I think are very important when you look at where this is going to go. Number one is aesthetics. Aesthetics is important, and to piggyback off of that, also just footprint. When you're talking about taking up curbside right-of-ways, and you're talking about potentially going into sidewalks, they need to be ADA accessible. They need to be easy for everyone to use. That is super important. But they can't be very bulky, and especially with a lot of communities that have historical, societies and parts that are basically under very strict rules, you need to be able to adapt to those rules, or there's just not going to be EV adoption there. That's very important. And then to mirror what John said, because I completely agree, just the maintenance of these stations, having a very quick turnaround if something goes down. Our New York City curbside charger actually has a breakaway, so if a car were to run into it, all the electricity is cut off, so there's not going to be live wires coming out of that pedestal. So, the maintenance and manufacturing these in a small footprint, I think, is very important. And then any possible integration when it comes into parking applications, things that the consumer or your constituents are already using, working towards those integrations is also important for a really seamless experience, because the easier it is, the better, and that's really what the focus needs to be on at the moment.
Yeah, and I'll just add, like any new or technology, a lot of companies are working, kind of separately to try and figure out, what's going wrong. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity for collaboration and partnership between, EV charging companies, technology providers, and to touch on James's point, it's such a pain to pull up to a charger and have to download a new app if you want to use the charger. Surfacing chargers is a very, just key kind of integration that needs to happen in order for, EV charging or EV adoption to really spur. And so being able to, as these new standards come about, like the open charge point protocol, that would really make charging more flexible and promote interoperability in the space. That's, I think, a really important kind of next step in these standards coming about, and making the experience better for the customer overall.
Great, thanks all. So now we're going to turn a couple questions to all of the panelists, and then open it up to any audience questions. So we have a few minutes to think of your excellent questions for our panel here. So I know we have some facility teams in the room. There's a lot more they are grappling with under Executive Order 22 and thinking through our larger obligations under the CLCPA and other climate goals. So vehicle electrification is one piece. There's building electrification. There's integration of renewables and battery storage systems into our facilities. A lot of complex pieces. They all sort of involve and or compete for the same kind of electrical capacity that we need to charge vehicles. There's also emerging technologies like vehicle to grid, virtual power plants, which we are hoping to get further into assessing feasibility for our own facilities. So with all this sort of complexity in these pieces, how should facility managers think about the complexities or the opportunities from these technologies without being overwhelmed by them?
Yeah, I could jump in first. I think it's important to start with the end point in mind. So if a fleet has a goal, say it's 2035, and you know what your fleet mix is, and you've thought through closely what your use cases are, you could start thinking through what kind of charging equipment you're going to want to have, what kind of electrical upgrades you're going to need, you know, and try to future-proof it as much as you can, right? There are some uncertainties and things you're not going to see coming, but for the most part, you could build this out and think about it intelligently so that you're building for the future earlier on. And it just saves money on the future rounds that you've already future-proofed the building for when you're 100% electric, and that you've spent the time thinking about that human element of, you know, what state of charge do the vehicles return at, and what time of day do they return? All those kind of things are going to determine what the size of your chargers are and what mix of level 2 and fast charging you're going to have at the facility. So all of that long-term planning, and then like talking to the utility, right? Because most of the time it's going to require a power upgrade to the facility. And you know, we've had lots of discussions with the other utilities in the state about this kind of long-term master planning, because a lot of times these facilities where you're doing the fleet electrification are right next door to another facility. So maybe we're working in a transit bus depot, but like 2 doors down is like a FedEx depot. And they have similar timelines to go electric. So from the utility perspective, they need to also be doing like grid planning, looking 15, 20 years out, so they're not digging up the sidewalk multiple times. So yeah, all that kind of long-term thinking really helps.
Yeah, and I would say also, like, really rely on RFQs, RFIs as well. Once you kind of have an understanding of what you're looking for, put that out to bid or put that out to gather more information. The private sector is working on battery storage, battery integration with charging. All of these things are already top of mind in our field. So you can get a lot of really valuable information by kind of understanding the framework that you're trying to put forth. Totally agree with John as well. You want to be pretty scientific if you're going to run a fleet. How many miles are these fleet cars driving a day? What are the routes? Are they going to be consistent? Is somebody going to be taking the charger home or the car home? Are they going to be charging at the fleet depot? It's important because when you look at the difference in scope of a level 2 deployment of like a 19.2 kilowatt charger that's going to charge a Tesla Model 3 and from 0 to 100 in about 3.5 to 4 hours, it's much less expensive than putting in a bunch of level 3 chargers. The other thing too is that car is going to have battery degradation at a much higher rate if you're charging with a level 3 charger every day. So there's a possibility for a mix, but you want to be really clear on what you're trying to get out of your project from the charging standpoint.
Yeah, and I guess I would just ditto all that. Very dependent on the use case. For instance, in New York City, TNC and rideshare having to go electric means that these kinds of drivers will need EV charging where they live, and so maybe DC fast charging doesn't make sense curbside or in a very populous area where maybe the grid capacity isn't sufficient. And so thinking about where these fleet drivers live and also where they're going to be parking and where their vehicle's going to be operating is probably, I think, a great first step in thinking about what kind of technology you want to go with.
Very good. So we have time for a couple of audience questions before we move to the next panel. We have a mic right in the middle. Feel free to step it up. Thanks, John.
Question for Mr. Markowitz. I'm curious if you see inductive charging having a role in the Evolve New York future.
Not in Evolve New York, in that that's like, serving the general public, and most of the cars are not configured for wireless charging. Where I do see a real use case for it is taxi fleets. And when they're in one of those waiting areas, like at a hotel or an airport where they're in a queue. So they could be charging while they're waiting to pick up a passenger. Another interesting use case we're interested in piloting is airport shuttle buses. Because unlike a lot of fleet vehicles, they have a very erratic use case. So an airport shuttle bus could be sitting for like 20 seconds and then get a radio call that they need to go pick, a bunch of employees up or something. Or they could be sitting for, 20 minutes, in which case like a wired charger might be more practical. So there I see like wireless charging as being a good kind of interface where, you're solving for both use cases of the 20-second stop and the 20-minute stop by having wireless charging. So to me, it's like a niche application that you want to like dovetail to the use case. So it's more interesting, I think, on the fleet side.
Very good. Got time for one more question. Any burning questions on EVSE for our panelists?
I'll go for it. The question is for John. In your slide, I saw that you have 170 DCFC ports right now for Evolve NY program, and then you have target for 400 in 2 years. So you're going to be deploying 230 ports in, I would say, 1.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. Can you provide some insight in that?
Yeah, so basically we have, I believe it's like another 25 sites that are in either active construction or design. And then the last batch of sites we're just signing now. So it's all active. And we should land at, I think it's about 82 sites to get to the full 400. Some of the additional sites are 6 charger sites. We have about 13 just in New York City alone at municipal parking lots. But yeah, really trying to get the geographic diversity as well. But yeah, those are 2 particular DC fast charging deserts. It's like New York City, it's not that there's not fast charging, it's just there's not enough for the population of vehicles, and the need is especially acute, being with all the apartment dwellers and the taxi fleets. But also serving those last few gaps on the major highways is a real objective of ours.
Very good. Thanks so much to our panel for joining today and sharing their insights. Yeah.